What's going on, everybody? Today we're going over the 4 most common issues with the FZ6 platform. Now, the FZ6 is widely considered to be the Toyota Corolla of the motorcycling world, meaning that it's largely bulletproof, but in my years of working on it and making content around the bike, I've noticed 4 common issues with the bike that seem to be happening to many people. So today, we're going to go over all of those things in great detail. Now, one of those things actually led to a recall in the United States of America, so stay tuned for that. But with that out of the way, let's go! The first thing up on the list is the cam chain tensioner. The cam chain tensioner sits right here behind this frame arm. This is the butt end of it, and from the front of the frame arm you can see where it attaches into the back of the cylinder head. The cam chain tensioner's job is to tension the chain that goes between the crankshaft and the camshaft's heads up here. If it starts to fail, you can hear a bunch of intermittent clicking. The one thing that'll distinguish the cam chain tensioner noise from a regular valve train noise is that it's not consistent with revs. With valve train noise, the more you rev the bike, the more frequent that noise happens. When a cam chain tensioner is failing, it's not always connected to revs. Down low you might hear clatter, you might not hear clatter at 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, and then you might hear a random inconsistent rattle happening 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 RPM because it's getting more vibrations in it. And also there's just certain harmonics happening within the bike that might be applying more pressure to the cam chain tensioner at higher revs or at certain revs down low like 2,000, 3,000. The best trick I have for you for identifying whether it's cam chain tensioner noise or regular valve train noise is using a stethoscope. Just like a doctor would use a stethoscope to listen to your chest and your breathing, you can get a stethoscope with a probe on the end and you can touch it to different areas in the engine to listen for the vibration. You can also do this by using a screwdriver, holding it to your ear bone, like the side of your head, and then touching the screwdriver to different spots on the motor, and the vibration will be translated through the screwdriver to your temple and will help you pick up specifically where the vibration is coming from. The common thing people do when they have a cam chain tensioner problem is they consider switching to a manual tensioner. The one in the bike is considered a hydraulic tensioner, and it will automatically increase the tension as the chain wears and stretches, which is very, very slowly. So what people do is they switch out this hydraulic one for a manually adjustable one, which essentially is a bolt with a lock nut that applies pressure to the back of the tensioning guide. And I don't really recommend you do this. This isn't really a big problem for Yamaha. Like, they haven't made a bad tensioner. It's just that they fail every now and then. It's a weak point of the motor, if you can consider it that. So I'd recommend going back to a new OEM one. It's easiest to install and it's the least amount of maintenance. For servicing this, you could most likely service it from outside the motor right here. If you could get a long, about 5mm Allen head out here so you could wrench on it from where my hand is, you could likely service this without having to take the tank and air box off. I've gone into great detail about reinstalling the cam chain tensioner, and I'll link that in a video down below. The next most common problem is misfires, and if you're a fan of the channel, you'd know that I've had my fair share of misfire problems. And after doing a lot of research and hearing from a lot of you guys online about your own misfire troubles, I've come to conclude that the ignition system on the FZ6 is not very robust. It's a bit of a parts bin bike, if you know what I mean. A misfire will present as, a bad idle, a stumble on acceleration, really bad fuel economy, or a transient loss of power when you're on the highway just cruising at a steady state of throttle. The ignition system on the FZ6 is considered a wasted spark system. Essentially, you have 2 coils and 4 cylinders, and every time you activate one coil, you get a spark on 2 cylinders. But only one of those 2 cylinders is actually firing. So the spark happening on the cylinder that's not firing, it's just in the middle of its changeover between exhaust and intake. There's no point in having the spark there. But this leads to a larger idea that it's cheaper to develop an ignition system that is a wasted spark system rather than 4 coils, 1 for each cylinder, or a coil-on-plug system like has been put in the modern R1. It's not like coil-on-plug technology wasn't available back in 2007 when they were designing this bike or updating it for the version 2 here, or even in 2004 when they made the very first FZ6. People like Kawasaki had coil-on-plug ignition systems on their 2002 ZX6R. That is a super sport classification of a bike, but still, the technology was out there. It just goes to show that the ignition system was designed around a budget on this bike, which is the reason why I think we see a lot of misfire issues on this level of bike. The main place I see misfire issues coming from is the leads and the spark plugs. People often have the leads that come off the high voltage side on the secondary coil fail where it meets the pencil that goes down to the spark plug. You have a high voltage wire that runs down the lead and connects to the spark plug cap, and all that happens is you have a couple wires that are stranded that get threaded in a copper wood screw type connection that winds into that set of stranded wire. And what happens is some of those stranded wires get moved, shuffled, or they're all to one side inside the housing, and it doesn't make a good connection there. You get a misfire, and that can be tricky to trace out, as well as the copper spark plugs. I know I haven't had the best experience with copper spark plugs, which is why I've upgraded to some NGK CR9 EIX plugs, which are iridium. You go, why didn't Yamaha put iridium plugs in the bike when it was available and works perfectly well? It comes down to cost. They got to cut their corners and keep the bike at a price point wherever they can, so putting copper plugs in is cheaper and it's more appealing to the manufacturer. If anything too, it gets their customers in the door more frequently for spark plug changes, which if you don't know is where a lot of manufacturers make most of their money, not in spark plug changes, but simply in maintenance. So if a bike becomes more maintenance heavy, the manufacturer makes more money, and if it's cheaper to produce that way, win-win for them. For us, not so much. If you're having a misfire issue, check out this video I'll link down below, but what I highly recommend is you upgrade to Iridium plugs, the CR9 EIX plugs. They'll last a lot longer, they're a single electrode, they're a direct fit for the bike. No issues running them, nothing you gotta change beside that. But if you really wanna go the extra mile, I'd recommend you look into figuring out how to retrofit modern, like 2016 and newer Yamaha R1 coil-on plug system. I've talked to one person that's done it, and I haven't seen any write-ups about doing this, but I know it's possible. You're essentially taking the trigger that goes to one of the coils and sending it to a coil-on plug system. This way you ditch the wasted spark system that's happening up behind the airbox here, and you have modern, reliable, cheap coil-on plug systems that are out of a modern bike that you can retrofit to fit in the FZ6. So if you're an electrical engineer or you love digging into electronics of the bike, go ahead, run down that avenue because it's worth investigating in the long term. Misfires are a pain in the side, but trust me, I can help you figure them out. So check out the links down below if you got a misfire problem. The third most common problem I've seen with the FZ6 is to do with the TPS sensor, which is down here under your fuel tank on the end of your individual throttle body rack. As I said in the intro, this was the sensor that actually was recalled by Yamaha in the United States. Now the recall was for 04 and 05 at Yamaha FZ6s. Now this is the S1 version, the early version of the FZ6, and they would replace the TPS sensor for you for free. So if you got an early one and it's never been replaced, check it out, call your Yamaha dealer, tell them your VIN, they'll tell you whether it has been replaced or when you can come in and get it changed. Your TPS sensor communicates information to your ECU basically on how much throttle you have, so it can calculate ignition timing, how much fuel to enrich to accelerate the bike, but basically it's a vital sensor to have your bike running properly. If your TPS has gone bad, you can experience stalling, bad fuel economy, dropping revs when you're trying to accelerate, but most notably, poor throttle response. I've done a whole video covering all the things you can check on your TPS sensor, which I'll link down below if you want to do a comprehensive deep dive on the sensor. But today I'm going to show you how to quickly assess your TPS sensor through diagnostic mode. So to get into diagnostic mode, flick your run stop switch to run. Put your 2 fingers on the reset select button, hold them down, and then turn the switch to on. You're going to hold it while the fuel pump primes and the dash does its warm up. You're going to see high blinking on the temperature, but then eventually it's going to switch. There we go. We got D1. If yours says CO, you hit select and change it to the next one, but you should just see D1 or DI. Press and hold, reset select once again for 2 more seconds. Now you're in. It'll say D:01. Ironically, the very first thing you see in diagnostic mode is your throttle position sensor. With the throttle completely shut, you should see a number between 15 and 17. When you roll to wide open throttle, you should see a number between 97 and 100. What you can also check for is that you have smooth increment of the number. So as you smoothly roll your wrist, you should see the numbers steadily climb. If you're rolling wrist and you're not seeing the numbers change, you've got a dead spot in your TPS, and that's going to be a problem. That's probably where you're experiencing your stumble or your rev dropping as you're trying to accelerate. It responds very quick on the dash, so that's great, but you should be able to wind it open, let it snap, and it drops right back to between 15 and 17. And every time you go to wide open, you should see between 97 and 100. That's that, simple as that. When you want to get out of diagnostic mode, just turn the bike off. Next time you turn the bike on, don't have to do anything special. There you go. The last and final issue with the FZ6 isn't so much with the FZ6, but with the owner. Now, I've heard it many, many times from people that buy an FZ6 that are worried about the noises, the clatter, the vibrations, this, that. Sometimes it's the paranoid owner that's actually the problem. These bikes have a hard mounted, as in it's directly bolted to the frame upon which you ride, solid lifter 4-cylinder that revs to 14,000 without any balance shafts. This thing is a vibrating sewing machine on steroids. So when people come from a car, or especially a luxury car, something European that you don't really have an experience of feeling the vibrations of the motor, or from a motorcycle, it's like a cruiser, a big thumpy Harley or something like that, they feel a bit stressed out because the thing kind of vibrates and rattles like no tomorrow. And that's not necessarily wrong, it's just something to be aware of and get used to. So the fourth issue is paranoid owners. I mean, I've been one of those people. I've had rattles on this bike. I've been like, what is that? What could it be? And sometimes just a valve train noise that you don't always hear, that your brain picks up and you're feeling a little paranoid. But either way, it's something to be aware of, that this bike isn't a quiet bike. It is not a smooth running 2-cylinder V-Star from Yamaha. It is a rattly 4-cylinder with solid lifters that make a lot of clatter. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope this gives you some insights on what to look out for when buying an FZ6 or things to look out on your own bike. As always, check the description down below for more comprehensive videos on all the things I talked about here today. Thanks for watching. Please smash the like and subscribe button if this helped you out. And as always, have a good day.